Hello everyone, I'm back, and with this banger a scientific genius named Thomas Harrier, businessman with an IQ of over 170, was transmigrated to an Imperial Prince body after a car accident that took his life. He found out that he is in a world similar to our own with a timeline akin to early 20th century. The body that he is occupying was the Imperial Prince of a failing empire who suddenly rose to power after a successful assassination attempt of his father. Unaware that the attack is just the beginning of what is to come. He faces many challenges throughout. Will Thomas Harrier be able to live his second life in peace while running an empire and getting it back to its former glory? Or will he succumb into a conspiracy lurking within the country's borders? Expect some Cold War-era techs. Super battleship with advanced electronics, propulsion, and fire control systems. Helicopters, missiles, modern medicines and equipment. AC-130, a nuke, Challenger or Abrams or Leopard. F-4 Phantom or MiG-21. Colored TVs. Everything. What I want you guys do is like, subscribe, and if we get a good amount of like he'll release the next part which is ready for production, just waiting on y'all's opinion on this. If you don't like it, I have some other one that I know you'll like. I can see it. No, some will like it and some won't. For those who won't, don't worry, I have some other one in the works. Chapter 4, I Will Save You. Brother, what nonsense are you talking about all of a sudden? This is not something you can play cool and joke about with. Tiffany was first to react, prickly as ever, even though the situation is dire. I'm serious. Do you think this is something I can joke around with? I will see her. Thomas's stance was resolute, but his sister still doesn't believe him. The royal doctor already said there was no cure for tuberculosis. The royal doctors are the best in the empire. If they were to conclude that it was impossible, then it's impossible. They just have to accept it. But to Thomas, it's not impossible. There is a way to save her. Even if you say you are serious, just how will you be able to save her? You're not even a doctor, Tiffany countered bitterly, not budging an inch. The royal doctors already said there's no cure for her disease, not even penicillin, a revolutionary medicine that can save her. Did she just say penicillin? So that medicine has already been introduced in this world? It is indeed a revolutionary medicine that cures a variety of diseases caused by bacteria such as pneumonia, meningitis, syphilis, gonorrhea, etc. But penicillin is ineffective against tuberculosis because the Mycobacterium tuberculosis has a different cell wall made of mycolic acid, which is hydrophobic in nature. Penicillin is hydrophilic, so it won't go through the cell walls of M. tuberculosis. Penicillin won't work against tuberculosis because the cell wall of Mycobacterium is much thicker and more hydrophobic, due to the presence of a wide array of different lipids that include mycolic acids. The lipid-rich nature renders the cell wall extremely hydrophobic and prevents the permeation of hydrophilic compounds such as penicillin. Alexander explained. There was a brief silence after that. How do you know about that? Tiffany was at a loss for words. You lost me there, brother, Christina added. I read it in a medical journal during my free time. Thomas came up with a lie. Anyways, I need to see her. After hearing a plausible excuse from him, his sister won't have a reason not to let him see her anymore. So they took him to see Anastasia. Anastasia was lying weakly on the bed, coughing. Alexander's eyes were filled with sadness and sympathy. A part of him died seeing his little sister like this. She's thin and looks so pale. Her once beautiful face is now distorted because of her illness. As for Tiffany and Christina, they had a sad look on their face. Make sure you wear a mask, dear brother. The doctor told us that tuberculosis is spread through the air. Christina advised. Alexander nodded, she couldn't be more right. So before approaching Anastasia, he wore a face mask. Then he walked over to Anastasia's bed. Having a closer look, he noticed that Anastasia's face was so thin and she was so pale that she appears sickly. She's lying there, coughing. Her body is covered with sweat and her flimsy body convulsed due to her cough. She looked so pitiful. It was indeed tuberculosis, he can tell by just a glance. There's a puddle of sweat on Anastasia's pillow. She's having a hard time breathing, she's suffering. Her breathing is so faint, he feels like she's just a breath away from death. The doctor said she only has a year or two to live, maybe 3 if lucky. But tell me, dear brother, does it look like she's lucky? Alexander grimaced. Inside the body of the prince, Thomas was conflicted with foreign emotions swirling like a storm. The prince loved his family so much that seeing them in this state would make him emotional. Thomas is affected by those emotions and is on the verge of breaking out tears. It was as though Alexander were still inside of him, dormant. The prince wanted to cry, but Thomas stopped him. It is unbecoming of him to be emotional. This is the first time he had experienced this. Thomas is struggling to keep himself in control. He can't afford to lose his cool. He has to think clearly. He has to think if he's going to save her. All of a sudden, Anastasia opened her eyes. She lifted her weak hand and cleared her throat. "Dear Alexander," she whispered and coughed. Alexander rushed to her side, alarmed. His hands acted on their own. "Anna, is something wrong? Please don't strain yourself, my dear," Alexander said softly, caressing her forehead with his warm touch. "Brother, I'm glad you're okay," Anna replied hoarsely. "Yes, I'm also glad that I survived the attack." Alexander let out a chuckle. At this point, it's uncertain who is talking right now. Is it the mind of Thomas? Or the heart of Alexander? Anna stared at him with a sad look because she feels that Alexander will never be able to accept her feelings for him. Alexander noticed that Anna was staring at him, so he continued to ask her. "What is it, Anna? Do you wish for something?" Anna stared at him for a second. Her expression was grave, but she replied, "I wanted to ask you to promise me you'll take care of your sisters, even after I'm gone," Anna whispered hoarsely. Alexander's eyes widened in shock. There's nothing he can say, he's at a loss for words. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He doesn't want to hear this. "I don't want you to feel sad when I'm gone," Anna continued. "I will join mother, father, in heaven, so don't be sad, okay? Will you promise me that?" Alexander was silent. He feels that he's suffocating, like there's a lump on his throat. She already accepted her fate. At such a young age, she already accepted the fact she won't live any longer. But Alexander's heart couldn't accept it. There's too much for her to learn about this world, things to experience, and find happiness. He won't let her be taken away by such an easily curable disease. "No. I will save you, Anna. I've already figured out a way to save you. So, while I'm creating it, I want you to promise me that you'll hang in there and wait for me, okay? Can you do that to me, sweetie?" Anna smiled. Her lips are dry and cracked. But her smile is radiant. She lifted her upper body with all of her strength and embraced Alexander. Alexander is affected by her strong embrace and he hugged her back. "I promise you, Anna, you will live longer than that. I will save you. I trust you, brother." Anna coughed violently. Alexander released her from his embrace and saw blood on his cloth. "She's coughing blood." Alexander looked in horror. "Cough cough. I'm fine, I just seem to have caught a little cold." Cough, or Anastasia, for her to make a joke out of her situation to make Alexander not worry. She may be a 13-year-old girl, but her mindset has already matured. The two princesses behind Alexander wiped the tears streaming down their cheeks. The royal family has a loving family, they care for each other. Despite their parents already died at the hands of a mysterious group wreaking havoc in the country, they remained strong. Alexander grabbed a piece of handkerchief and wiped the blood off her mouth. Her face is pale, but she smiled adoringly. "Give me 10 to 15 days, Alexander said. "I will create a medicine that will get you out of this illness. The medicine that I'll synthesize will save your life," Alexander assured. Anna nodded, placing her trust in him. "I've taken so much of your time. I'm going to let you rest. When you're fully recovered, we will have a lot of catching to do." Alexander stood up and walked over to his two waiting sisters. "Dear brother, what do you mean by creating a medicine?" Christina asked. "I want to know too." Tiffany butted in. Alexander sighed before answering them. "The medicine that I'll create will be 100% effective against tuberculosis. I've read some medical journals in the library during my free time, as I've mentioned earlier." "You're talking like this medicine already exists. If they do, then the royal doctor would have administered it to her." "Just how confident are you, brother?" Tiffany cut his words. "Can you let me finish, please, Tiffany?" Tiffany's face flushed. I apologize. Okay, the medicine that I'll be creating is an aminoglycoside antibiotic. Its name is streptomycin. Streptomycin? Christina and Tiffany intoned together. That's right, it will certainly defeat tuberculosis, Alexander said as he walked past them and stopped by the door. Now, time is of the essence. Let's make an order for the equipment. Chapter 5, A First Day. Alexander already had a list of equipment in his mind, the only problem now is where to get it. Most of which are obtainable from chemical or pharmaceutical plants. He doesn't have a list of companies yet, so he went to a room that would serve as his office to look. In front of him was Christina, leading him to his office room. As she opened the door for him, he was greeted by a large room with a pretty big table at the far back center. The ceiling, as always, was high and gilded. The office walls were decorated with old and priceless paintings and antiques. So this is the office of the Emperor of all Ruthenia, huh? He said to himself, glancing at every nook and cranny of his administrative room. Alexander strode all the way to his desk, his footsteps echoed across the room. He sat down in his chair and it was as if he was sitting on a throne. I can't still imagine that you'll become the father of all Ruthenia at such a young age, my dear brother. Christina stood by his side. Yeah, me too. No one expected Alexander de Romanov to become an emperor at such a young age. Many people would see him unqualified for such a post, with their opinions backed with facts and stories about him being a playboy and not that good in academics. But due to the recent despicable event where the emperor and the empress were assassinated, Alexander is expected to become the next emperor according to the line of succession. Normally, it would be the first child of the royal family, but since the first was a woman, and a woman can't become a ruler due to succession laws, Alexander, who is the first male born to the royal family, is the only can take the throne. So as of right now, Alexander Romanov is the de facto emperor of Ruthenia. Though his work hasn't started yet because of his recovery, he'd expect people from administrative sectors to visit him in a day or two to debrief him on his work. Christina, does an emperor get to have a personal assistant? Alexander asked. Well, now he's in the office, he doesn't know where he will get the list of the companies he needed to inquire with. Yes, but they'll arrive in the afternoon along with the ministers of our father. I was told to contact them after you recovered. So the work will start today, huh? Alexander imagined, what kind of work does an emperor perform daily? Is it like being a CEO? If that was the case, then it'll be easy for him to adjust. Setting that aside, Alexander began to look for documents referencing chemical or pharmaceutical plants. Christina also helped, but after 30 minutes, they were not in luck. Looks like we're going to have to ask our ministers for this matter, don't you think? Alexander's eyes flickered to Katerina, sorting and returning a stack of documents to where they originally belonged. Yes, I think so too, dear brother. Is it that urgent that you have to take the medicine? Well, according to the prognosis of the royal doctor, Anna has years to live. But I want to end her suffering as soon as possible, so technically yes, it's kind of urgent. Alright, I'll inform you when the ministers arrive. I'll leave you here in your office. If you need anything, you can ask the royal guards just outside the door to call for me, Christina said as she glided out of his room. 1 hour later, the telephone at Alexander's desk rang. He picked it up and he was greeted by Christina's voice. The ministers are already here. Is it okay to send them there now, dear brother? Yeah. Send them in. Alexander nodded and replaced the telephone back on its cradle. A minute later, a group of ministers and generals walked into the office room and were surprised to see a young boy already sitting in the chair that belongs to the emperor. Alexander stood up and looked at the ministers and generals walking in. Exchanging a look with one another, they bowed reverently. Alexander smiled, bowing his head back. As they stood up straight, one of the people in the line began speaking. If I may, Your Majesty. Alexander looked at the man and nodded. We, your ministers, wanted to express our condolences regarding your parents' death. We are very much regretful for the loss of both your parents. Alexander nodded again. I appreciate that. Now, if you will allow me to be the first to introduce myself. I'm the Prime Minister of Ruthenia Empire, Sergei Grigorievich. A man in his mid-40s walked forward and presented himself. One by one, they stepped forward, introducing themselves to the young emperor. I am Dmitry Kanev, Minister of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. A man in his early 40s, wearing the military uniform, introduced himself. I'm Vladimir Borisov, Minister of Finance. An older man, in his 60s, wearing a grey suit, introduced himself. Alexei Lavrov, Minister of War, at your service, Your Majesty. A man in a military uniform introduced himself. He looked to be in his late 40s. I'm Eduard Grieg, the Minister of Commerce and Industry. A man in his early 50s stepped forward and introduced himself. Your Majesty, we are now one with you. We will do everything in our power to make sure the Empire will be safe with you in charge, Sergei said as he concluded introducing themselves. Thank you for your cooperation. Now, I believe that my father has unfinished business during his administration, and due to my absence, operations within the government halted. Now I'm here, let's get to work. But first, Sir Eduard, will you please come here for a second? Alexander beckoned the Minister of Commerce and Industry to come closer. As you wish, Your Majesty. Eduard walked to the center of the room, in front of Alexander. As the Minister of Commerce and Industry, I assume that you have a list of registered chemical and pharmaceutical plants in your office, am I right? Yes, Your Majesty. Alexander sighed in relief. He pulled something out of his breast pocket. It was a piece of paper. He handed it to Eduard, who then perused the contents. It's a list of chemicals and equipment I need to be delivered by today or tomorrow. I was hoping if you could do that, I'll pay for whatever cost you and your department incurs. I understand, Your Majesty. I shall immediately start the paperwork for the purchase of the chemicals and equipment. Do you already have a location in mind for delivery? Yes, I need it here in the palace. I understand. If I may ask, Your Majesty, what will you do to those chemicals? It's not your concern. Just do as I said, Alexander said firmly. Yes, Your Majesty. I'm sorry if I sounded disrespectful, Eduard said apologetically. You may now go back with the others. Alexander returned to his seat as Eduard returned to the row of ministers. Now then, is there an urgent matter that requires my attention? It's sooner than he expected. To think that he'll begin working as an emperor right now felt unreal. Your Majesty, if I may be frank, we do have concerning that needs to be dealt with. Alexander flickered his gaze to the man who spoke. It was the Dmitry Kanev, the Minister of Internal Affairs. I allow it. Granted, Alexander. Dmitry walked forward and handed Alexander a piece of paper. Alexander read through the paper. March to the Winter Palace, 1st of August. We wish our father, the Emperor, to deliver us from the evil oppressors, the despotic and irresponsible government, and the capitalist exploiters, crooks, and robbers of Ruthenian people. Alexander looked up. I'm afraid this is a threat to the security of our country, and to the royal family, Your Majesty. Dmitry bowed his head. It's the work of an extremist group again. Sergei snorted. Shit, Alexander swore quietly. Looking back, the Ruthenian Empire is not doing well on the home front. Workers' strike, famine, protest, terrorist bombings, and assassination, left and right. It was all a disaster. All these because the economy is in a failing state, largely due to the late emperor. How about the assassination of my father and mother? Have you looked into that as well? We're not sure, but we have an idea. Right now we have our people on the ground, looking into this matter. Sergei replied. Okay, keep me updated. I will, Your Majesty. Your Majesty, we implore you to evacuate the palace temporarily until the threat is settled, implored Dmitry. Threat? Alexander looked at the paper in his hand. You mean the march? Dmitry nodded. We fear that the people might raid the palace and... Dmitry paused, unable to complete his words. What is it? Alexander prodded. We fear that they might harm you, and your family, Your Majesty. Dmitry? What are you talking about in front of the Emperor? Sergei suddenly interjected, startling Dmitry. Then he looked at the Emperor. Your Majesty, worry not, I've already dispatched troops around the palace to ensure the palace's security. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I was only thinking what's best for the welfare of the royal family and the country. Dmitry quickly bowed his head. It's okay, Dmitry. Thanks for the concern, Alexander said reassuringly. He glanced at the person behind who haven't talked since their introduction. Do you two have anything to add? They were the Minister of War and the Minister of Finance. Alexei and Vladimir. Your Majesty, I've also come here to report something urgent regarding the ongoing war with the Yamato Empire. Alexander's eyes widened in surprise. A war? In this meeting, Alexander found two major problems, a possible uprising, and a war. So much for his first day. Chapter 6, First Decisions. The war in the Far East started when the Ruthenian Empire wanted to expand its influence over the kingdom of Shosorn. Coincidentally, so did the Yamato Empire. The war has been raging on for almost a year with both sides suffering losses, but the one who is receiving a heavy beating is the Ruthenian Empire. Based on Alexander's memories, the reason why the Ruthenian is losing against Yamato Empire is due to two things. The first is that the Ruthenian Empire is underestimating the Yamato Empire due to its location. They believed they are uncivilized, brutes, and barbarians who knows nothing and feared the West. The Ruthenian Empire misjudged the situation, thinking they would never dare to go against them. They didn't took them seriously. The second one is the Yamato Empire's military power. The Yamato Empire are a huge industrial and military force. The current eastern territory of the Ruthenian Empire is far from modernized. The war started when the Yamato Empire torpedoed Ruthenian's battleships docked at Pusan port without a declaration of war, though there was one. It just arrived too late. Alexander's father declared war on Yamato Empire and the war continues until today. The war is going bad on our side, Your Majesty. They've taken Port Pusan and shattered our Pacific fleet. The Siberian Army Corps have been forced to retreat. Humph, Sergei scoffed, cutting in the conversation. Once the Baltic fleet arrived at the Pacific, the war will soon turn into our favor, Sergei said confidently. Your Majesty, continuing this war will severely toll our country. The economy is on a weakening state and the people are complaining about higher taxes and rationing food. We need to end this war. Alexei. Sergei's voice cracked like a whip. Have you no shame? Why are you making us look like we're defeated here, huh? That we don't have chances of winning against those monkeys? It's a hopeless war, Prime Minister. Alexei stood firm in his ground, unfazed by Sergei's bellow. It's hard to admit it, but we can't win against the Yamato Empire. They best us in every aspects. Military, firepower, technology, manpower, logistics. Sergei shifted his eyes to Alexander, who is listening to their heated argument. Your Majesty, all we just need is patience. The moment our ships arrived at the Yamato Empire, they'll decimate them like they did to ours. Your Majesty, the people are desperate for a better life. They don't need a war. Alexei tried to convince Alexander. That is exactly what they need. Sergei countered. Don't let people walk over you, Your Majesty. The two ministers exchanged a glaring look. Meanwhile, Alexander deeply pondered about the issue at hand. So it was this bad, huh? Although he's not formally crowned yet, he is still the head of state. To think that in his first day he'll have to make tough decisions. He weighed in pros and cons. Since the Ruthenian Empire is at decline, winning this war would surely raise the people's confidence in the government, but if it failed, it could jeopardize the Romanov rule. Not only that, the Baltic fleet is the mainstay of Ruthenia's power to Europa. If they loses this fleet, its standing amongst the great nations of the world collapses. Alexander knows that much thanks to his father forcing him to attend tutorial lessons with the royal tutor. Two problem at hand, the upcoming protest and the war going badly against them. It's a tough decision to make. Alexander breathed deeply before making his decision. Sir Alexei, if my father sent the Baltic fleet to the Pacific, where are they now? According to the latest report from the Admiral of the Baltic Fleet, they are in Indian Ocean. So they have reached that far already, huh? Alexander ran his tongue around his cheeks. If, and only if, our Baltic fleet arrives, what is our chances of winning the war? We're not certain, Your Majesty. Alexei replied diffidently. So you're not confident that we are going to win the war even if our strongest fleet arrive there? Is that what you're saying? Alexei nodded as beads of sweat pooling on the nape of his neck. I'm afraid so. Sir Vladimir, what is your say on this matter? I completely agree with the Minister of War, Your Majesty. This war is taking a toll in our economy. The strikes, the protest, the civil unrest. Alexei and Vladimir's answer earn a disapproving look from Sergei. Then I've made my decision. We're going to end this war. Your Majesty? Sergei was the first one who spoke up. Are you sure? We can easily. Alexander waved his hand to silence him. I've heard enough. If this is a fight we can't win, then it's best not to fight it. I don't want to send any more Ruthenian soldiers to their death. But ending this war means we're going to need some concessions, am I right, Prime Minister? Yes. What do you think their demands will be? Well, they'll ask us to pull out our troops in the Kingdom of Cherson, demands war reparations, territorial concessions, recognition. Sergei trailed off. The people won't agree to this loss, Your Majesty. Alexander stood up and stared at him coldly. It's my responsibility to deal with the people, not you, Prime Minister. So contact our embassy in Yamato Empire to set up negotiations. You'll be the one to deal with them, so make sure our losses be minimized. Is that understood? Prime Minister? Sergei gulped, intimidated by Alexander's stare. He nodded quickly. Very well. Alexander's eyes flickered to Alexei. Recall the Baltic Fleet. Yes, Your Majesty. Okay, we shall move on to the next discussion. The discussion went on for over 3 hours, debriefing Alexander about the country's situation during his time of absence. That's it for today, I'll see you on tomorrow. The ministers bowed in front of him before leaving his office. Seeing that they left, Alexander stretched his arms as it got sore from sitting still for so long. A knock on his door made Alexander whirl around. A lovely voice rang out as the door opened. Dear brother, are you finished meeting with your ministers? It was Christina. Yeah, I just finished. Alexander answered as he stretches his neck. I didn't expect it to be that long, my neck hurts. Is that so? Christina flitted across the room, her summery dress and silver hair danced around her. As soon as she arrived, she offered. Do you want me to massage you? Alexander smiled. Sure. He took off his jacket and sat in front of his desk. Good, then close your eyes. Alexander obeyed, his sister's warm hands run over his shoulders. How was it? It's as good as I expected. Alexander replied, lying back on his chair. I had a little argument with Sergei. He's the same old, grumpy, sour and self-centered man. Christina giggled. I have no doubt about that. Did he say something to upset you? Yeah, he wanted me to continue the war against Yamato. Alexander lazily replied. It's no surprise that he would say that. So what was your decision? I considered the opinion of the Minister of War and Finance and ended the war with Yamato. Negotiations will probably take a month. Inwardly, Alexander is having a hard time acting like Alexander. In his past life, he was silent, stern, and calculating, but in order to not harbor suspicion, he needed to be like his brother. I see, it was a good decision, dear brother. I too notice the effect of war in our country. If it's our father, I'm sure he'll side with Sergei. I heard that he sent all of our Baltic fleet to the Pacific. Let's not talk about that right now. Okay, Christina chuckled. I have some good news. I've ordered the Minister of Commerce and Industry to place an order for the equipment, chemicals, and bacteria. Bacteria? What are you going to do with bacteria? What do you think? Alexander deadpanned. I'm going to create a cure out of bacteria. Just like how penicillin was extracted from a mold. How? Even if I explain you wouldn't understand, but for the sake of simplicity, we can extract the cure from fermentation process. It's a lot more complicated than how penicillin was created. We will grow a bacteria called Streptomyces griseus, ferment it, and extract it. It's easier said than done. You sound confident, brother. I didn't know you have such talents in the field of medicine. Christina massaged his temples. Well, it's not like he can answer that. He's from another world and a different person than Alexander, who has a PhD in biomedical engineering, justifying his knowledge. I read it in books, Alexander said simply. Is that so? So it's a good thing we have a lot of books around here. Christina teased. That's true. It's a good thing. Alexander replied absently. Acting like a brother is tiring. He doesn't even know if he is doing it right. Is this how siblings interact with one another? A warm conversation. Shall we continue tomorrow? I still have work to catch up. Sure. Thanks for the massage, it was refreshing. I may not be of help, dear brother, but if you need massage, just call me. I'll keep that in mind. Chapter 7, Working Hard. Alone in his office, Alexander continued reading articles about Ruthenia Empire. Ruthenia Empire is a massive transcontinental country that extended across Eurasia comparable to the territory of the Russian Empire of his world. It has a sheer size of 22,400,000 square kilometers with a total population of 170 million. Due to its massive size, it contains a lot of ethnic minorities living across the empire. However, his great-grandfather oppressed those minorities with his domestic policy called Ruthenification, assimilating them into the dominant Ruthenian tradition, culture, and language. However, this act became a source of resentment to the people who were affected, pushing them to the edge and assassinating his great-grandfather. The people believe that the Ruthenification would end after the assassination, but instead, it intensified under his grandfather and later his father. Due to this act, the Ruthenia Empire underwent a huge struggle for the past 2 decades, especially when the economy collapsed under his father's mismanagement, resulting in civil unrest and numerous rebellions sprouting across the empire. This also dampened the empire's industrialization, falling behind the rest of Europe, which is now more modernized. Not only that, the way the emperors governs was quickly becoming outdated, retaining the rules of autocracy, basically meaning the emperor holds the most power. People had already voiced their opinion, wanting a fair representation in the government, but their cries went unheard. Thinking that it was foolish for a peasant to be part of the government. The more he reads about his new home, the more his head aches. So he got reincarnated in the body of a prince whose country is on the verge of collapse. That's like being sent into a prison with a death sentence. This has to change. He thought to himself, if he wanted to survive in this hostile and foreign world where the future is unknown, he has to listen to the cries of the people. As he thought before, this world is not similar to his own, so history is altered, hence he doesn't know how things will turn out. To add salt to the wound, he's not much keen on world history, though he has some historical knowledge about technologies that rose to prominence. Then he remembered that they'll be marching for the Winter Palace on the 1st of August, which that means in 5 days, the palace ground will be full of protesters desiring change. Okay, I decided, he said to himself and continued, I'll meet those people head-on and listen to their plea. Now that the decision is settled, Alexander shifted his attention to another issue, his sister Anastasia, who has tuberculosis. The process of synthesizing streptomycin is quite simple. You grow a strain of Streptomyces griseus for 5 days, ferment it using a submerged fermentation process, extract it, then test it for purity. All can be done within 15 days if the equipment he ordered arrives in the evening. He already has a framework in his head. Grabbing a pen and a book, he wrote all the processes involved in streptomycin production. After that, he closed the book and stashed it in the drawer under his table. He glanced over his shoulder and noticed the sun is already setting, its orange hue streaming through the window. He lost track of time from reading books. Despite knowing that, Alexander continued to work, knowing more about his territory. Outside, Christina, butler of the royal palace, announced something to her. Your Highness, the delivery for His Majesty Alexander has arrived. Where do you want us to place it? Christina tilted her head to the side, humming in thought. I haven't asked dear brother about that. I'll ask him and notify you as soon as I know. Thank you for your hard work. You may leave now. As you wish, Your Highness. Christina didn't waste a second as she hurriedly went towards Alexander's office. Knock. 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 Brother, it's Christina. Can I come in? I have some important questions. There was no response. What could he be doing? She wondered. She knocked again and there is still no response. Concerned, Christina turned the knob of the door with "Excuse me." Inside, he saw Alexander, soundly sleeping on his desk with open books sprawled over his desk and some on the floor, probably knocked by his arms. It was messy, but Christina found it cute. She gently walked towards him as to not make a noise that could disturb him. Arriving in front of the desk, she leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Brother? Hey brother. Christina saw no changes on his face. Did he work himself hard on his first day? She studied the books around him and it's all on a technical level. She smiled as she found that out. Ever since he woke up out of a coma, she noticed the behavior of her brother changed a little. He's never been this studious before and is always fooling around. But earlier during the celebration of his successful recovery, Alexander announced something incredulous. Saving Anastasia with his medicine. Though a bit far-fetched and bewildering, she believed him after seeing his determination and confidence. It also touched her heart when his brother assured Anastasia he was going to free her of her suffering. Everyone wanted that, including Tiffany, who also placed her hopes on him despite their relationship. But now the equipment he ordered arrived in the palace, she has to wake him up. Brother. This time, a gentle touch pressed against Alexander's right hand. Picked. The moment her fingers touched his brother's hand, he felt a jolt of electricity pulse through his hand and body, waking him up in an instant. It's not what you think it is, I'm not sleeping. Christine chuckled at the comment. Not asleep? She said with a raised eyebrow. Why are you sprawled over your desk then? You even knocked a stack of your books over. Alexander flinched and looked over the side. Indeed, his arm had pushed them over. Ah, he said sheepishly, getting up and moving towards them. I really did knock them, he chuckled shyly as he went down on his knee and picked the books back up again. How long was I asleep for? I don't know, but it's already 9 p.m. Not that long, huh? So why did you come to me? Well, my brother, I'm actually here to tell you that the equipment you ordered has arrived. They are asking me where they should put it. Ah, right. Thanks, Christina. Do we have some vacant rooms that we can use? Temperature and place are important when growing bacteria. 25 to 30 degrees Celsius to be precise. Christina hummed in thought. I'm sorry brother, but I can't think of a room with that temperature. I can't even tell the exact temperature right now, she chuckled bashfully as she rubbed her head. It's okay, I believe there is a blueprint of this palace. Alexander scours the bookshelves and drawers, looking for the blueprint of the Winter Palace. Aha, he exclaimed as his finger found where the blueprint of the palace is. He placed it on his desk, sat down, and perused its content, looking for a room suitable for growing microorganisms and the fermentation process. According to the design, the walls, the ventilation, it should be here. He pointed to an empty room that met his criteria. Understood brother, I shall relay it to them. I'm coming with you. Huh? Why brother? I need to see the equipment for myself. Alexander stood up, stashed the blueprint back to where he found it, and walked to the door side by side with Christina. Okay, the Winter Palace was humming softly with nightlife. All the lamps were alight with electricity, casting gentle, illuminating light throughout the palace. The air was comfortably cool. It was peaceful. At the gates, there are several trucks in line with people unloading the equipment. Alexander and Christina arrived at the scene and greeted them. Upon noticing their presence, they immediately stopped what they doing and kneeled down in respect. Your Majesty, it's an honor. A man welcomed. Is everything accounted for? Alexander asked simply. Yes, Your Majesty. Everything is in order. It's all labeled and we'll be moving it to your desired room. That's good. Alexander nodded. Your Majesty. Can we continue on our work? Alexander glanced at the workers, who are still in kneeling positions. Ah. Of course. Alexander laughed inwardly, the customs and the etiquette are killing him. Alexander and Christina observed as the delivery workers moved boxes and materials to the room they chose. Once it's complete, we will start right away. You sure, brother? Aren't you going to rest first? No need, I've already taken a nap, remember? Ah, Christina gasped softly. Okay, please do your best, brother, for the sake of Anna's life. I will. Chapter 8, Things About to Get Serious. It took more than 2 hours to set up the equipments in Alexander's new lab. With everything in place, he wasted no time. He donned his lab coat, and eye protection and gloves for safety. He hefted a sack of soil from the corner and placed it on the table, then he opened it and sifted through the contents. He plucked a handful of soil from the sack and rubbed it between his fingers. Streptomyces griseus is a common bacteria that is usually found in soil. In the year 1943, streptomycin was discovered by American biochemists Selman Waxman, Albert Schutz, and Elizabeth Bougie in Streptomyces griseus. Streptomycin is the first antibiotic that is effective against tuberculosis. They also found out that S. griseus yield more than 20 antibiotics, including actinomycin, clavacin, streptothricin, grisane, neomycin, fradsin, candicidin, and candidin to name a few. For the discovery of streptomycin, Selman Waxman received a Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 1952, and the streptomycin was listed on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines as the most effective and safe medicines needed in a health system, dropping the case of tuberculosis significantly in the 1960s. He famously quoted, "Out of earth shall come to thy salvation." In this world, Alexander doesn't know who will discover the streptomycin. Will there be a parallel Selman Waxman? There's no way of finding that out. But his sister desperately needs the medicine in order for her to survive. So Alexander will introduce a new revolutionary medicine that won't be used in medical treatments for another 30 years. There's not much to do on the first day, so Alexander will just prepare the inoculum containing Streptomyces griseus, which can be done in a simple way. First, he scooped a handful of soil where he will extract the Streptomyces griseus. Since there are a lot of bacteria found in soil, he'll have to grow a colony of bacteria, locate a strain of S. griseus, isolate it, then multiply it by using Hocken Hue medium. Second, he prepared for the dilution. The equipment used is nutrient agar composing 5 grams of peptone, 5 grams of sodium chloride, 3 grams of beef extract, 15 grams of agar, and 1000 millimeters of distilled water. The glassware is a conical flask, Petri dishes, 1 milliliter pipette, and test tubes. Fortunately, in this world's era, autoclaves were already introduced, saving him a lot of time sterilizing each of the instruments. Then in the dilution process, where a solution mixed with soil sample and distilled water is transferred from one test tube to another, Alexander finished the process for 30 minutes. After that, Alexander used the pipette to transfer the solution mixed and nutrient agar in the test tubes to each Petri dish. With that, step 1 is finished. He just has to wait for about 5 to 6 days for them to grow. Looking at his wristwatch, Alexander saw the time was already 2 a.m. He started to feel sleepy, and since his job for the day was done, he called it a day and left the laboratory. Outside the door, there was a sign of "Mounted. Keep out, only authorized personnel allowed," with a picture of a biohazard symbol. 6 hours later, Christina knocked at his door. "Brother, wake up. It's already 8 in the morning." Her call was only met with a snore. Christina sighed, "He's usually up by this time." "Brother." She knocked on the door again. She heard a grumble and then a soft thump from the bed. "Brother, I'm coming in," she said as she opened the door. Inside his bedroom, Christina saw Alexander lying in his bed, limbs stretched out in all directions, sleeping soundly loudly. She stepped closer and noticed that he was still wearing a lab coat. "Good morning, dear brother. It's morning. Can you hear me? She tilted her head to the side as she noticed her dear brother's sleeping face. She giggled. "Your sleeping face looks so happy. You must be having a nice dream, huh?" At this moment, Christina didn't notice that her hand is moving, touching her brother's face. "Oh, that can't do. I suddenly felt like touching you, but maybe it would be fine if it's just for a while." "Poke poke." "It's soft," Alexander groaned and turned around on his bed. "Poke poke." "Wake up, dear brother." She poked his face until his eyes opened. "Gah." He sat up, blinked his eyes, and realized he was still in his room. "Morning, brother." "Ah, it's you, Christina." He rubbed his eyes and yawned. "So it's already morning, huh?" He let out a groan again. "I felt like I haven't had much sleep." "Looking at your attire, I see it as the case." Christina pointed at his lab coat. Alexander looked down and understood what she meant. "Ah, yeah, I forgot to remove it. I was so sleepy that time, so I couldn't care less." Alexander staggered out of his bed and removed his lab coat. Is the breakfast ready? Yes, brother. Tiffania is waiting for us to join her, Christina answered. Then we shouldn't let her wait any longer. As the de facto emperor who will be crowned in the future, Alexander has already assumed the role. Yesterday, he planned his own daily activities as the head of state that goes something like this. From 8:00 a.m. to 8:45 a.m. in the morning is the time when he'll take a bath and have breakfast with his sisters. At 9:00 a.m. is attending a daily report meeting with ministers. From 10:00 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. is the time for his daily exercise. Doing cardio, physical exercises, and doing some weightlifting. From 12:00 a.m. to 2:00 p.m. is where he'll do some paperwork in the emperor's study. From 2:00 p.m. to 4:00 p.m. is a long walk around the palace with one of his siblings. Typically, this is his break time. Today, he planned to stroll around the palace with Anastasia. Dressed in a military overcoat, Alexander waited for Anastasia's servants. He was sitting on the bench which was covered by the canopy of a big tree in the center of the palace's garden. Not long after, he saw the two servants walking toward him. Your Majesty. The two servants bowed to him with respect. Her Highness, Princess Anastasia has arrived, they said. Alexander nodded and stood up. He then walked towards the garden's entrance with his two servants. Hello, Anastasia, he said to a girl in the wheelchair, her face covered with a face mask. Hi, brother. Anastasia greeted. Shall we proceed? Alexander said as he offered his arm. Anastasia nodded adoringly. Alexander head over behind Anastasia where he can push the wheelchair around the palace. According to Alexander's memories, it's been months since they strolled together. She must have missed this moment. So Anastasia, how are you feeling? Alexander struck a conversation. Never been better. Anastasia replied sarcastically, she was never been better thanks to her disease. Don't worry, once I completed the medicine you'll be able to walk side by side with me in no time. Alexander raised her hopes. It must have been hard for her to be alone in a room where she can't meet her brother and sisters normally. Under her mask, Anastasia's lips curved up into a smile. I trust you, brother. Even though I don't know what you're doing, she laughed. You're not the first. Your sister Christina and Tiffania looked at me like I was crazy when I told them I will save you. Anna giggled. I think that's normal since you're not even a doctor in the first place, she teased. Well, technically I'm not. But are the doctors taking care of you doing you any good? Anna shrugged. Even so, I'm still thankful for their continuous efforts. Alexander looked up at the clear blue sky. Anna looked up as well and sighed. I wish I could see you three without the mask. Alexander stopped suddenly after hearing those words. She was that sad and were silent for a second. Alexander walked around and stopped in front of her. He kneeled on one knee and removed his mask. Brother, no. Anna tried to stop him but it was too late as Alexander caught her delicate arm. Then he shunted her arms across and let go, her warm hand landing on his face. Anna, I promised that I will cure you. I've already started yesterday and will be completed in 2 or 3 weeks. Alexander assured, lovely caressing her hand. But brother, you're gonna get infected if I touch you. Don't worry, that's not how transmission work. As long as you have the mask on, you won't infect me. Alexander assured. You said it will take you 15 days, right? Why did it change? Anna said weakly, coughing. Because I didn't account for the level of technology this world has, Alexander answered without sparing a thought. Level of technology of this world? Anna tilted her head to the side, quizzically. Alexander realized his mistake and quickly took it back. Forget that I said that. Anyways, let's stop talking about sad things. Let's talk about your wish. What will you do after you recover? It's a simple, dear brother. To spend time with you and my sisters, visit a city, eat together, things like that, she chuckled bashfully. Oh silly me. That's a wonderful wish you have, Anna. Don't worry, I will make sure to grant that wish of yours. While they were having their sweet moments, a footstep was heard behind Anna. Alexander peeked over her shoulder and saw a middle-aged man in a military uniform. It was Sergei, his prime minister. Your Majesty, Your Highness. I hope the day is treating you both well. He bowed reverently. Sergei, is there something I can do for you? I came here to deliver news from our embassy in the Yamato Empire. Can we talk somewhere else private? It sounded urgent, but Alexander shifted his attention to Anna. It's okay brother, just go. I'll be fine, Anna said, holding his hand. Alexander nodded and stood up. He bowed to her. All right then, I'll be back. He beckoned at the servants watching from afar to come to take care of her. And then he turned to the Prime Minister. Let's go. The two men walked away from Anastasia, leaving her alone in the garden staring aimlessly at the sky as if she was reminiscing something. What's the matter, Sergei? The Yamato Empire is willing to engage in a peace treaty. We are still waiting for their terms. But don't worry your majesty, I won't give them a penny or a land. Good, just make sure our losses are limited. Is that all you have to say? You know that information can wait until tomorrow, right? Well, there's also another side. This is about the assassination of you and your parents. Alexander gulped after hearing that. What is it? I just got a call from the Minister of the Department for Protecting Public Security and Order. The investigation results came in. They've made a positive ID on the explosives. We know who attacked your convoy.